My phone rang at 7 in the morning on a Friday, and I knew before I answered that it was going to be my brother asking for something I didn't want to give. I was right. "Alyssa, hey, I need a favor." Not, "Good morning," not, "How are you?" just straight to the ask. That was Daniel. Always had been. I set down my coffee and looked out the window of my new apartment in Lincoln Park. I'd been here for 3 weeks. Boxes were still stacked in the corner of my living room. I hadn't even updated my address with most of my friends yet. "What kind of favor?" I asked, already knowing I was going to say no. "Rachel and I are going to Napa this weekend. Anniversary trip. I already booked the flights and the hotel. It's going to be amazing. But we need someone to watch the kids." I closed my eyes. "Daniel, I can't." "Come on, Alyssa, it's just 3 days, Friday night to Monday morning. You love the kids." "I do love the kids, but I'm not available this weekend. I have plans." "What plans?" "That's not really the point." "Alyssa, we've been planning this for months. I already paid for everything, non-refundable. You know how expensive Napa is. This is the first real vacation Rachel and I have had in years." I thought about pointing out that this was the third first real vacation they'd taken in the last 18 months, but I didn't, because it wouldn't matter. Daniel had a way of rewriting history to fit whatever story he needed in the moment. "I'm sorry, but no. You'll need to find another sitter, or reschedule." There was a pause. When he spoke again, his voice had that edge to it, the one that meant he was about to make this my problem. "You know what, Alyssa? This is really selfish. We're family. Family helps each other. But you've always been like this. Ever since you got that fancy job and moved to your fancy neighborhood, you've been too good for us." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the guilt he was so good at triggering. But I'd been working with a therapist for 2 years on exactly this, on setting boundaries, on not letting Daniel weaponize my love for his children against my own needs. "Daniel, I said no. I'm not available. You need to make other arrangements." "Fine, whatever. I'll figure it out myself, like I always do." He hung up. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone, waiting for the guilt to wash over me the way it used to. It didn't come. Or it did, but quieter, manageable. I'd said no. I'd held my boundary. That was growth. I went to work, had a normal day, came home, made dinner, watched a documentary, went to bed. I didn't think about Daniel again until Saturday morning when my phone started blowing up. The first call was from Daniel. I didn't answer. The second call was from his wife, Rachel. I didn't answer that either. Then the texts started coming. "Daniel, where are you?" "Daniel, the kids are at your house and no one's answering." "Daniel, this isn't funny, Alyssa. Answer your phone." "Rachel, Alyssa, please call us back. There's been a misunderstanding." "Rachel, the police are involved. We need you to call right now." My stomach dropped. I called Daniel back. He answered on the first ring. "Where the hell are you?" His voice was shaking, not angry, scared. "I'm at my apartment. What's going on?"
"Your apartment? What are you talking about? The kids are at your house in Evanston and, Daniel, I don't live in Evanston anymore. I moved 3 weeks ago." The silence on the other end was profound. "What?" "I sold the house. I moved to Lincoln Park. I told Mom. I assumed she told you." You sold the house? When?" "The closing was a month ago." "Daniel, what did you do?" His breathing was ragged now. "We're in California. We dropped the kids off at your house last night. I used the spare key you gave me. I left them in the living room with sleeping bags and snacks and a note saying you'd be home soon." My blood went cold. "You did what?" "I left them at your house because you wouldn't help me and I didn't have anyone else and we already paid for everything and—" "Daniel," my voice was deadly calm. "I told you no. I explicitly said I was not available to watch your children, and you left them at a house I don't own anymore, where 3 children do not live, without permission from anyone. I didn't know you sold it. How was I supposed to know? You were supposed to know because when someone says no, you don't override their decision and force your children on them anyway. Oh my God, his voice cracked. Oh my God, Alyssa, what do I do? The new owner called the police. They're saying it's criminal trespassing. They're saying I abandoned my children. I can't. We're in California. We can't get back until tomorrow. I don't know what to do. I sat down on my couch. My hands were shaking. Who bought my house, Daniel? I don't know. Some guy. The cops said he's former military or something. He came home this morning and found 3 kids in his living room. He called 911. They took the kids. Alyssa, they took my kids. Child Services took my kids. I felt like I was underwater. This couldn't be real. Okay, listen to me. Give me the contact information for whoever you've been talking to. I'll call them. I'll explain. But Daniel, please, Alyssa, please fix this. I know I messed up. I know, but please. He was crying now. Actual tears. I'd heard Daniel cry maybe twice in my entire life. Give me the information. He sent me a number, a Chicago Police Department non-emergency line, and a case number. I called immediately. The officer who answered was professional but firm. Yes, they'd responded to a call about 3 minors found unattended in a private residence. Yes, the homeowner had reported it as a break-in initially. Yes, DCFS had been called, and the children were currently in protective custody. I'm their aunt, I said. I can come get them. This is a misunderstanding. Ma'am, the children were left alone in someone else's home without permission. The parents are out of state. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is child endangerment. Their father made a mistake. He believed the house still belonged to me. He used an old key. He didn't know I'd sold it. Did you give him permission to leave the children with you this weekend? I hesitated. No. So, even if the house had still been yours, this would have been against your wishes? Yes, but, ma'am, I understand this is complicated, but from our perspective, a parent left 3 children aged 8, 6, and 4 alone in a stranger's home, and then left the state. We have to follow protocol. My nephew was 8. My nieces were 6 and 4. I thought about them waking up in a strange place, scared, not understanding where their parents were or why this was happening. Can I see them? You can contact DCFS. They'll determine if you're an appropriate placement option while this gets sorted out. I spent the next 6 hours on the phone with DCFS, with a family lawyer I'd worked with on estate planning, with my mother, who was horrified, with Rachel, who kept crying and asking me why I hadn't just agreed to watch them in the first place.
That question sat in my chest like a stone. By evening, I'd been approved for emergency kinship placement. I drove to the DCFS office and picked up 3 exhausted, confused children who'd spent the day being interviewed by social workers and trying to understand why their parents had left them in a stranger's house. My nephew, Carter, looked at me with eyes that were trying very hard to be brave. "Aunt Alyssa, are we in trouble?" And knelt down to his level. "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. None of this is your fault. Dad said you'd be at the house, but you weren't, and then a big man came home, and he looked really mad, and he called the police, and—" I know, but you're safe now. You're going to stay with me for a little bit, okay?" The girls were quieter. My 6-year-old niece, Emma, held my hand so tight it hurt. The 4-year-old, Sophie, just stared. I took them back to my apartment, ordered pizza, let them watch cartoons on my laptop, made up beds with spare blankets and pillows. Around 9, Daniel called. "Can we talk to them?"
I looked at the 3 children currently eating pizza on my living room floor. Yes, but Daniel, you need to understand something. They're scared. They don't understand why you left them in a stranger's house. You need to be calm. You need to not make this worse. I know. I just need to hear their voices. I put him on speaker. Watching my brother try to explain to his children why they'd woken up alone in a place that wasn't safe, why a stranger had found them, why the police had come, it was one of the hardest things I've ever witnessed. Carter asked the question that broke me. Dad, why didn't you ask Aunt Alyssa if it was okay first? Daniel didn't have an answer. After the kids went to sleep, Daniel and I talked, really talked, for the first time in years. I didn't think you were serious, he said quietly. When you said no, I thought you were just being difficult. I thought if I just did it anyway, you'd deal with it. You always deal with it. That's the problem, Daniel. I always did deal with it, so you never had to face consequences. You never had to actually respect my boundaries because I always gave in eventually. I know. Do you? Because this isn't just about me anymore. Your kids spent a day in the system because you decided that what you wanted was more important than my explicit refusal, because you thought you could force my hand. He was quiet for a long time. What happens now? Now you come home, you deal with DCFS, you deal with whatever legal consequences come from this, you explain to your children why you made the choice you made, and you start respecting people when they tell you no. We can't afford a lawyer, Alyssa. We spent everything on this trip. If they charge me with something, then you should have thought about that before you left 3 kids in a house that wasn't mine. It wasn't cruel, it was just true. Daniel and Rachel came back Sunday night. Monday morning, they met with DCFS and a court-appointed attorney. The homeowner, a veteran named Marcus Webb who'd moved his family to Evanston for a fresh start, didn't press charges for trespassing, but DCFS opened a case, mandated parenting classes, regular check-ins. The whole thing went on Daniel's record. Rachel called me a week later. He blames you, you know. He says if you'd just said yes in the first place, none of this would have happened. I wasn't surprised. That was Daniel, always someone else's fault. Rachel, I said no. That should have been the end of the conversation. What happened after that was his choice. I know, I do know, but he's my husband and he's struggling with this. Then he needs to struggle with it. Maybe that's what he needs, to actually face consequences for once. She didn't call back after that.
My mother called, asked me if I could have just helped out, just this once, to keep the peace. I told her that keeping the peace had enabled Daniel's behavior for 33 years, and maybe if someone had let him face real consequences earlier, his children wouldn't have ended up in protective custody. She didn't like that, but she didn't argue either. I saw the kids a few times over the next month, always supervised, always structured. Connor asked me once if I was mad at his dad. No, sweetheart, I'm not mad, but I am sad that he made a choice that hurt you, and I want you to know that what happened wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. Dad says you should have just said yes. I knelt down so we were eye level. Carter, when someone tells you no, what are you supposed to do? Respect it. Exactly. Even grown-ups have to respect when someone says no. Your dad didn't do that, and that's on him. Not on me, not on you, on him. He nodded slowly. I think I get it. 6 months later, things had settled into a new normal. Daniel and Rachel were still together, still struggling financially, still in mandated classes. The kids were okay, resilient in the way kids are, but changed. Daniel and I don't talk much anymore. When we do, it's surface level, polite, distant. I don't feel guilty about that, because here's what I learned. Boundaries aren't cruel, they're necessary. And when someone repeatedly ignores your boundaries, there will eventually be consequences. Not because you're punishing them, but because reality has limits that even the most entitled person can't negotiate around forever.
I didn't put Daniel's children in danger. He did, when he decided that his wants were more important than my clearly stated refusal, when he decided that forcing my compliance was acceptable because it usually worked. I loved my brother. Part of me still does, but I love myself more now, and I love the version of me that can say no and mean it, that can hold a boundary even when it's hard, that can let someone else face the consequences of their own choices without rushing in to save them. The kids are doing better now. Daniel's learning, slowly, painfully, that the world doesn't rearrange itself around his convenience. And me? I'm learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable them, even when they're family, especially when they're family, because family isn't supposed to mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's irresponsibility. It's supposed to mean respect, boundaries, mutual care, and when it doesn't, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let reality be the teacher you could never be, even if it means 3 children spend a frightening day learning that actions, especially their parents' actions, have consequences. I still think about that day sometimes, about Carter's face when I picked him up from DCFS, about the way Sophie wouldn't let go of my hand for hours, and I wonder if I could have prevented it by just saying yes. But then I remember I did say no, clearly, firmly, with no ambiguity. What happened after that was never my responsibility to prevent. It was Daniel's responsibility not to cause. And maybe, just maybe, the fact that he finally faced real consequences will mean his children grow up in a home where no means no, where boundaries are respected, where love doesn't mean letting someone steamroll over you whenever it's convenient for them. I hope so, for their sake, and for the sake of every person they'll interact with for the rest of their lives who will also, at some point, need to tell them no, because the world is full of people who won't always give you what you want, and learning to accept that with grace instead of entitlement, that's not a lesson I could have taught Daniel, but reality finally did.